These signaling cascades, which are initiated because of binding of the ligands with the receptors, then these signaling cascades depend upon certain rules, which we will just discuss shortly to some extent. For example, first of all, different cells, and this is a very important feature which maintains the diversity of different types of signaling events which takes place in our bodies. For instance, different cells express different genes, but you know that, I mean, every cell have almost the same genome which we inherit from our parents, and from zygote then there comes the cellular division, and as a result there comes the embryo and the fetus, and then it gives rise to birth of full human being, of you and me. So genome is the same, but here we mean to say that different genes are expressed. If one gene is expressed in one part of the cell, it might not be expressed or might not be expressed to that extent in another type of cell. That's why the neuronal cells give rise to the neuronal signaling, the signaling which is involved in the nervous system based actions. Then there is the signaling which is involved in the muscular contraction. That's why muscle cells have their own set of expression of genes which play important role in the muscular contraction, and so on and so forth. So of course these are the genes which code for different molecules, which contributes to those signaling events. But how these, is important to know that in different tissues, in different cell types, different genes are expressed, different molecules then leads to a different signaling cascade. Also, one very important feature you have to keep in mind, that in many instances it happens that there is a single ligand which give rise to many responses, I mean, which may give rise to diverse sort of responses, a single ligand. What is the purpose of this diverse responses? Because you have to keep in mind that your cells always have to deal with limited resources. They have to manage the energy they are consuming and the need of the energy for different other functions. So one way of making maximum use of the signaling events, that one ligand or one signaling molecule can give rise to the different side of signaling responses. For instance, you can take the example of adrenaline response. Adrenaline triggers the physiological effects like your heartbeat, like your muscular contraction, like your breathing activities, and it can prepare you at the same time for doing lots of different responses. For instance, it can lead to the flight or fight response, which is very much needed if you face an urgent response. For instance, in the case of a dangerous situation in which your survival depends upon some urgent responses. Then also other principles you have to keep in mind is that generally the signaling cascades can be divided into three major signaling sections, signaling events. One is the relay, then other is the what we say the amplification, and then third is the integration, and finally there comes the feedback. So relay mean that once receptor, I mean, we are talking about, let's just for the sake of convenience, here we are focusing on the receptor based signaling. So once receptor get activated by a ligand, it then send its responses, its signaling cascade to the downstream molecules, and this doesn't have to be one single molecule. I mean, keep this thing in mind. It's very important that you should not think that things always occur in a linear fashion in your cells. The cells are very dynamic entities. there are hundreds of molecules which are present in the cells, and they are always they have the ability to interact with each other. So a single response doesn't mean that it is occurring because of a linear interaction between a molecule A, which is activating molecule B, which is activating molecule C, which is molecule, it's not like that. There is a whole diversity of molecules which are involved, and this is important. So if the receptor is activated, it then activates the downstream molecules. This is what is the relay system, that downstream molecules activate further downstream molecules, and that activation usually requires phosphorylation or certainly sometimes dephosphorylation. In any case, this diversity of the molecules which is making this relay system, it then make it certain that a very successful response can be at the end can be achieved. And then there is the amplification. We had one single ligand and we need a very strong response. So for that you have to have your signaling events which have to be amplified. One way we have seen in the GPCRs, the cyclic AMP, one signaling event gives rise to, let's say, 3 or 4 relay elements, and then it gives rise to hundreds of thousands of cyclic AMP molecules, which of course then initiate further, each cyclic AMP molecule further then initiate or activate other molecules, and in this way there will be amplification. So ये amplification, बड़े से बड़ा होना किसी reaction का, it's very important because you have to have a very active and very successful response at the end. And then there's needed integration also, because the responses are coming from different molecules, and there has to be fine tuning of these molecules. There have to be strategy at molecular level that in which way the response will be the most effective, and that is the integration. And then finally also, I mean, there has to be a regulatory mechanism, and one of the very basic and important and fundamental regulatory mechanism as far as cellular signaling is concerned is the feedback mechanisms. And you will see it in each and every metabolic pathway we will be discussing, that how feedback mechanism is regulating the very what we say the occurrence of that path, very running of that pathway. That pathway would have never been regulated if feedback pathway was not. What is feedback pathway? It's a pathway in which a product control the reaction. Product can control in a negative way, that gives rise to the what is the negative feedback mechanism, or it can be in a positive way, that is known as the positive feedback mechanism. A very important example which you will see also again and again is when ATP is involved in the as a negative regulator for the phosphorylation reactions. You will see, for example, in one of the example is that it reduces the activity of the phosphofructase kinase when you will be seeing the glycolytic pathway. So in this way, if there is an excessive product, that product will tend to inhibit its production because it's no much needed. So this feedback mechanism, and there are other ways of mechanism also which eventually regulate the signaling events, and this regulation is highly important. So it's not only the initiation, not only the relay, not only the amplification or integration, the regulation of the overall signaling pathway is also as important as the other elements of the signaling event.